who will be on Zoom, Joefe Santarita, who is he? Are you there, Joefe? Could you?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
Good
fantastic.
morning. Yes.
Great. By means of introduction, Joefe Santarita is professor and former dean of the University of the Philippines Asian Center. In 2012, he was conferred the Doctor of Philosophy in South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. And he's been serving as affiliate faculty of the UP Open University's ASEAN Studies graduate program, Tri-College PhD Philippine Studies program, and the School of Library and Information Studies. His research interest focuses on India-ASEAN relations and data diplomacy and maritime history, and has published several books, chapters, and journal articles. Currently, he serves as the president of the ASEAN Studies Association of the Philippines. Today, he'll be speaking on the subject of, scroll down, the seducers of men, recruiters and deserters in 18th century Manila. And how do I need some technical support here. Thank you.
From me, of all people.
Yes, sorry. So make him host.
Yeah, can you?
Make him host and then. Oh, no, okay, make him co-host. Make co-host. Yes. So Joefe, you should be able to start your presentation.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Christina. Good morning and good evening here in the Philippines. Much as I want to join you on site, my visa and passport just arrived today after more than a month of waiting. Nonetheless, I'm thankful to Dr. Christina Juan of the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and Dr. Christine Lee of Princeton University for this opportunity to present my paper. So in anticipation of some problems, I recorded the presentation, so I'll share this to you. Thank you. I use Seducers of Men in my title to reflect the words of Drake, Smith, and Brooke in the report to the Council of Manila on the 3rd of March, 1763, to refer to the recruiters of deserters away from the British forces. While this paper inevitably touches on the inter-imperial wrangling between Great Britain and Spain, it tries to focus on non-European actors' role in the colonial occupation of the Philippines from 1762 to 1764. This paper will concentrate on the seducers and on the socio-economic conditions leading to the recruitment of deserters from the British forces in the archipelago, namely Sepoys, Laskars, and to some extent, the French. In particular, this paper tries to document the local histories or microhistory of collaborations and resistance during the British occupation of Manila. This study is primarily drawn from the proceedings of the President and Council of Manila from 1762 to 1764. The 8 volumes contain the diaries and consultations of the Deputy Governor and Council of Manila under the British occupation. They also contain a number of letters written from Manila to the Court of Directors and to the President and Council of Fort St. George. Emma Blair and James Robertson's The Philippine Islands, Volume 49 is also consulted, along with the secondary sources written in recent decade about the British occupation of Manila. In the brief occupation of Manila, skirmishes for the last 2 years were not exclusive only between the Britishers and the Spaniards. Religious peoples, Filipino masses, and deserters such as Sepoys, Subadars, and Jamadars from India, and French also played crucial roles in the wrangling, although a bit unheralded in reports and in historical narratives. Aside from these individuals, the war was also participated by the seducers, who serve as agents of collaboration and resistance. This situation was best described by Matthew Horne in his letter to the council in 1763. He reported that the enemy had employed very extraordinary methods to induce non-commissioned officers and sovereign men to take such an uncommon step. He further reported that one of his men came and informed him that one of the canons of the cathedral had endeavored to induce him to desert, but the man could not produce witnesses to confirm his charge. Upon examination of the contents of the Manilha Consultations, the accused seducers were really canons of the cathedral and some Filipinos who were dependent to Governor General Anda. In the records, friars Francisco Calejeto, Alonso Forero, Saint Iago Lucio Antonio Blanco, Manuel de Santo Tomas de Villamecas, and Nicolas Chaldas were found guilty of corresponding with the enemy and encouraged the desertion of the British forces as manifested by several letters found in the convent. Another seducer was Don Joseph Islava Calaraga, a dependent on Senor Anda, whom they found concealed in the cell of the convent. Another one was an Augustinian friar of Tombobong, who seduced the captain of a village to go over to Spanish Governor General Simon de Anda y Salazar. Another seducer, whose travails were lengthily documented during the interrogation, was of Padre Esteban. In his report, Francis Jordan reported that Padre Esteban had seduced Robert Murray to desertion by giving him a pass to Pampanga. William Flint also reported to Dawson Drake that another sepoy deserted from the detachment at Maragondon because of the enticement of the padres. There was also a report that a certain Padre Villafarma of the Parian had been tampering with the Chinese to induce them to join Governor General Anda. Interestingly, there was also a Malay seducer. Francisco, another document is Fernando de la Cruz, was confined on suspicion of having endeavored to entice two sepoys to desert. According to Kisnanay of Sepoys, de la Cruz asked him if he would go to Pampanga, and also inquired if he would carry away two sepoys who deserted from Quiapo. Enticement package include $1,000 for every recruited subadar or Indian officer, $100 for every naik or petty officer, and $15 for every sepoy. Another testimony was given by Bim Naik Subadar. He personally recalled that Fernando had been persuading him to desert and he would return on the morrow. In exchange, he would be paid $1,000, promoted to a major with an allowance of $100 per month. The general distress of the people, the scarcity of provisions, which had been the cause of much desertion, the frequent casualties in the garrison, and the state of the treasury were the factors which seducers capitalized to induce officers and personnel to desertion. First is the lack of provision. A good example was the helpless situation in the garrison of Cavite. Captain Richard Bishop noticed that the garrison was in destitute of every kind of provision. As a result, he ordered 2 champans of chanam to supply the needs of 249 garrison officers and servants. Rice in particular was scarce, and the price was bit high. Second is the delay in the release of bata. The sepoys were being much dissatisfied because of their long wait to receive their bata or special allowance, at the rate allowed upon the Bengal expedition. The sepoys claimed that the said bata was allegedly promised to them before embarking at Madras. Captain William Flint appealed on their behalf to be granted a bata in Bengal rate of 7 rupees. Furthermore, the Sepoys also asked for additional compensation. In 1763, the Sepoys had requested Captain Flint to represent them to the council to request for their double accoutrements and some small addition to their present. The third is caused by great dissatisfaction, and they frequently complained the engagements they entered into Madras were not made good to them. The Laskars too complained that instead of receiving the same pay and bata on a Bengali expedition, which they said was promised to them, they were paid only 8 fanams less than at Madras. The fourth factor is drunkenness. In Dawson Drake's letter to Captain Flint, the governor had reminded the captain to keep up a proper discipline and good behavior among soldiers. Drunkenness had greatly prevailed in the garrison. The company had allowed soldiers 2 drums per day, and persons caught providing them with arak were severely punished. The last factor is the imprudence of some British officials. There were a series of tussles and tensions that happened between the military officers and members of the Council of Manila regarding the assignment of troops and provisions of supplies to garrisons. In fact, in the last days of the British administration in the Philippines, the High Command had floated the idea of leaving hundreds of sepoys in Luzon. This plan, however, did not push through, since leaving the sepoys behind, who were already greatly exasperated, will undoubtedly stage a mutiny. This decision would heighten the discontent, since the sepoys were extremely mutinous, because they were promised on their leaving Madras that they should be permitted to return in 6 months. Leaving them to themselves would be to expose them to the rancor of the Spaniards, who would, in all probability, readily embrace the first opportunity or disturbance to use them all. Desertion became a major concern of the British leadership in northern Philippines. The documented desertions mostly happened in 1763 and early of 1764. In January of 1763, Major Robert Fell found the enemy posted in the church strongly fortified in Bulacan. Major Fell noticed that the force was composed of approximately 400 persons, among whom were the 3 padres, an alcalde, 2 French deserters, 11 Spanish officers, and many Huachinangos. The following month, a sergeant, a corporal, and 10 men of the French companies deserted on 25th of February, and 4 of the regiment and 9 sepoys a few days passed. For Drake, the desertion will not only reduce the already weak garrison, but considerably augment the strength of the British enemy, who only want European force to lead them as formidable force. There was the fear also about the influence of the clergy and others who may stir up those remaining to act in concert with them in any treacherous scheme they may form for cutting off the garrison. On 27 April of 1763, Captain Thomas Backhouse noticed in Lipa, Batangas, that the fields were covered with horse and foot with numbers exceeded 3,000. On May 7, Captain John Muir reported to the council that per intelligence from the Padre of Mibong, there were 5,000 Pampangos, all the European and Sepoy deserters, with 4 pieces of cannon and scaling ladders stationed in Marikina, and was ready to attack Pasig in the evening of the same day. On 22nd June, Captain Brereton reported to Dawson Drake that one of the 79th Regiment had deserted because of drunkenness. Another man, being drunk on the party commanded by Captain Bishop, also deserted and was taken up by the Sepoys and tried in Manila for his life. Lastly, Dawson Drake and Henry Parsons informed Captain William Stevenson and Francis Jordan that a party of about 200 horses in March of 1764, consisting of commissaries and a number of deserters attacked the post of Palvorista and wounded a jamidar in the thigh after a smart fire which lasted some time. In an attempt to prevent desertion of troops, several steps were proposed by Major Fell and Captain Backhouse. Some were implemented for the good of the service and the security of the garrison. First, 100 Chinese were posted along the riverside opposite to the wall below Santa Cruz Bridge, another between the post number 1 and number 2, and a third at the bridge of St. Lazaro. A reward of $30 were given to anyone for apprehending any soldier who passed the first post without a written license signified by the governor. Second, soldiers, Sepoys and Laskars were given augmentation to their subsistence, which enabled them to support themselves with comfort and put a stop to their desertion. Third, a reward of $200 was offered to any soldier or other who shall discover and convict any person or persons. This is a counter-offer to the enemy's promise of $100 advance and $1 per gin being offered by some disaffected to induce soldiers to desert. Aside from that, Naig received a gratuity of $25 and that a handsome sword with value of $100 be publicly presented to the Subadar in the parade before all the troops in the name of the Honorable Company. Fourth, forbade the use of sedan chairs and accordingly gave severe punishment for the unauthorized use. It was reported that many people were missing and that they had been carried away in covered sedans. Aside from the above-mentioned proposed mechanism, several steps were implemented locally. Stockades were shut every 10 in the evening. Moreover, no padres were permitted to enter within unless he produced a pass signed by one of the gentlemen of the council. Furthermore, outposts were immediately occupied. Another step was the making of Laskars as artillery volunteers in lieu of sepoys. Due to frequent desertions and the town and suburbs swarmed with these seducers, the British administration felt that an example became necessary. In the case of Padre Esteban, the punishment was mitigated into a fine of 40 pounds and 6 months imprisonment. In another instance, the British decided to implement capital punishment with a twist. They resolved that the prisoner be carried from Manila through the suburb of Santa Cruz. The provost, at the same time, causing his crime to be published at the corner of every street until he reached Quiapo. There, he be hanged within sight of the post to deter others from following examples. Seducing men, particularly officers in the Subadar, as well as jamidars, was a strategic and bold move. The more the Spaniards recruited officers in their camps will mean multiplicity. These officials were consequently convinced their troops and thereby create demoralization in the British ranks. Such misfortune was an addition to the Spanish colonial government, since this development will boost the conviction of Filipino allies to support the Spaniards, since the Sepoys were previously being feared as murderers or executioners when they were still active in British garrisons. Likewise, seducing men means additional arms and munitions in the Spanish armory. After their desertions, Sepoys were no longer seen as enemies of the Spaniards, and by extension of the Filipinos. Thus, staying and having affairs with the Filipinas was no longer a big issue for the Spanish colonial government. The post-British colonization had allowed these deserters to build their own family in the outskirts of Manila. Some Sepoys were not repatriated to India before 1767, and 100 of them, mostly sick and wounded, including some deserters, stayed behind. They forged relationships with local women, and their descendants are still recognizable in 2 towns on the islands of Luzon. They settled in Cainta, where they produced those dusky descendants. In fact, in 1905, it was documented by John Metzger that the descendants were few in number and occupied principally the district lying about the pueblo of Cainta. Moreover, the Sepoys in the British Army who decided to settle in Cainta became a new source of manpower. They contributed greatly to the subsequent rehabilitation and expansion of agriculture in the Pasig-Cainta region. In fact, to their deep satisfaction, Don Pascual de Santa Ana or the Santanas and his descendants would later employ them in their farms. This is the lasting effect of the desertion leading to the ever-growing communities of people of Indian origin in the municipality of Cainta in contemporary Rizal province. This paper locates a place for seducers and deserters in the inter-imperial wrangling between Great Britain and Spain from 1762 to 1764. Using microhistory method, the study tries to concentrate on the desertion with special focus on the role and strategies of the seducers and the deserters in the affairs of British administration and the long-term effect of Philippine society. The narrative in the conventional history of British occupation focuses primarily on the tassels of the British and the Spaniards, while seducers are consciously or otherwise sidelined and are completely made unknown. These individuals, in the context of the British occupation, are either agents of collaborations or resistance, or both. They were heroes from the point of view of Spain, since their very extraordinary methods of convincing officers and sepoys had triggered demoralization in the British troops. The enhancement of the depleted armaments of the Spanish colonial government can be attributed to them as well. Moreover, seducers too were extraordinary because they were mostly people of the Catholic Church. This would perhaps explain why the deserters, particularly the sepoys, did not encounter much problem with the Filipinos after the British withdrawals, since they were considered as friends of the canons of the cathedral. From the British point of view, these seducers were agents of resistance, or simply as villains who tried to sow division and conflict. The aftermath of such methods has obviously created tensions within the British bureaucracy, at least in the Council of Manila and the officers stationed in the garrisons, regarding the administration of troops. The lasting effect of such seduction is the formation of communities of the children of the seduced, whose descendants are found nowadays in the island of Luzon.
So that's it. Thank you very much. And I'd like to